Hello, everyone. Welcome to CyVerse's Fall 2023 webinars. I'm Tina Lee, CyVerse's User Engagement Officer, and the one who probably messed up on the Zoom link, so my apologies. We are pleased to kick off our webinars today with a two-part webinar on using wearables data in your research. Today is part one, which will focus on how to access, manage, and integrate the data from the plethora of IoT wearable devices. Next month is part two, and that will focus on analyzing and visualizing wearables data. I'm going to take care of some light housekeeping first, and then we'll dive into the webinar. First, webinar date change. The November webinar on cacao has to be pushed back to November 17th as the November 10th date is a holiday. And today's webinar is a little bit longer than 30 minutes, maybe 35. So with time at the end for your questions, of course. Please open the Zoom chat window and type your questions there for Shravan to address. We are recording this webinar, and I'll post the video recording to our website later today. And now I am pleased to introduce Dr. Shravan Aras, Assistant Director of Sensor Analysis and Smart Health Platforms at the University of Arizona Health Sciences Department. Shravan's research areas span across energy optimization for sensors, clinical imaging using machine learning techniques, graded authentication based on biometrics, and biomedical algorithms for cardiovascular systems. He has also been instrumental in advocating for the low-code, no-code initiative, which gives clinicians and non-technical people the tools to develop sensor-based applications for distributed clinical data. So with all that, welcome, Shravan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tina, for that amazing introduction. And nice to see everybody virtually, of course. Thank you for taking the time to join this webinar. And with that, I'll get started. So today's outline will go over what the current sensor landscape is and why it is important now to start integrating sensors into your research projects, why we created a new initiative called the Sensor Fabric and what it does and why we need it. We'll talk a little bit about integrating wearable devices using CyVerse and My Data Helps. And we'll go over a step-by-step demonstration of how to use these tools towards the very end of the webinar. So when we talk about wearable sensors or commercial sensors in general, there's a ton of sensors that come in mind. The ones that we are focusing on today for the scope of this webinar is going to solely be wearable sensors, which are wearable fitness trackers like your Fitbit, your Apple Watch, or your Aura Ring, your wearable blood pressure monitor cuffs, the smart scales, and all of those different things. So what is the research importance now of including sensors into your research studies? So more data is always great, and everyone loves to have larger cohort sizes and larger sample sizes. And that's good news for those looking at wearable sensors. So in the last 5 years, there has been a 30% increase in the number of users who use wearable devices like Fitbits, Garmin's, Apple Watch. That went from 51.9 million users to almost 67 users at the end of last year in 2022. There are several different reasons why this has happened. Sensors have become a lot more affordable. You can get a device for as cheap as $100, or you can get something more expensive, upwards of around $400. They're no longer these bulky little devices that clinicians have to give their participants and then they go home with it. These are nice and small and fashionable, and they have become extremely easy to use and operate. As a researcher, why does it matter for your research grants? So in the last 3 years, if you did a quick PubMed survey, there have been over 7,000 publications that have used wearable sensors in some form or other. That is around a 34% increase in the last 3 years. That amounts to almost $58 million in NIH funding for these proposals just in the last 3 years. So we know that NIH is looking for these wearable sensor projects and these wearable sensor grants. And more data points in a sensor study, which is longitudinal, is a lot better as compared to having single data points. So classically, you had surveys where participants would come back to the clinic or the EHR data sets, which only had a few data points spread across multiple weeks. Now with these wearable sensors, you can get a very high frequency longitudinal data across multiple months, and you can start analyzing all of that together. It also helps you measure different physical parameters rather than inferring them. So having a survey which asks someone how much they slept, rather than being able to directly measure what their sleep quality was, how long they have been sleeping, or what their efficiency as far as sleep goes. So what are we trying to solve, and what is sensor fabric, and why are we getting that? So there are a couple of different pain points that, at least at the University of Arizona, we have been able to identify. There is a large difficulty in integrating multiple sensors, since each sensor has a different mode of integration. So Fitbit might be different than a Garmin device, a Garmin might be totally different than an Aura device, and an Aura might be completely different than something like a MoviSense patch, which you put on your chest. And so having these different modalities of integrating various sensors makes it far challenging for PIs to start new studies which have multiple sensors in them. There are a lot of hurdles with creating and analyzing this sensor data. So classically, you had graduate students or research coordinators or even PIs take all of the sensor data in CSVs or JSON files, dump them on their local laptops, and then start going through them, which has been a very cumbersome way of doing it. There hasn't been a tie into the institutional resources. And that is very important, since when you're writing your grant applications, showing institutional researches on those grant applications gives a massive amount of edge. And the most important thing probably here is the new NIH data management policy and the need to address that for sensor data. I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the new NIH data management policy. And I want to specifically focus on this acronym called as FAIR, which is part of that policy. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. And with our sensor fabric initiative, we're trying to hit all of these different goals for sensor data. So we are making it findable by using data from University of Arizona Library, where you can go ahead and catalog your sensor data for public viewing. Not the actual data, but the metadata on it. Let me correct myself there. Data is more accessible to the use of CyVerse Health and CyVerse. So CyVerse Health is a new initiative. It's an enclave that allows you to run your PHI laden data inside a secure VPN. And CyVerse, as all of you know, is already what is existing, and you can use that to access your data very easily if sensor data is stored on it. Interoperable by using various standard storage formats to store the sensor data. So not everyone is using different formats. And perhaps the most important thing of all is reproducibility. And reproducibility through the use of Jupyter notebooks, which you can then share and which you can then add to your research papers so that other people can go and look at it. And just a quick note, NIH and NSF is encouraging people to add the NIH data management and the NSF data management plans, which are separate slightly in their research proposals as they submitted. So going ahead, we identified a few common components to solve this. We looked at what would be the most easiest way to connect multiple sensors. How can you make your research reproducible? What is an easy and accessible way to store these sensor data? And how can you make it easy to share? So we partnered with a few different industry partners as well as CyVerse. So in order to be able to connect multiple sensors together, we use My Data Hubs, which is a product that has been created by a company called Scalable Evolution. In order to be able to reproduce your research, we make heavy use of CyVerse DE, which is the CyVerse discovery environment. Accessibility is offered by the CyVerse data store, where you can store all of your sensor data, and you can also use the same features inside CyVerse to create teams and share them. So this helps you hit most of your NIH data management components, which I mentioned before. All right. So given all of these things, we needed a glue to put everything together. And so we came up with Sensor Fabric as a response to all of these different pain points. And so Sensor Fabric is just a set of libraries and tools which holds all of these things together here at the University of Arizona. It allows you to open and manage connections to various sensor sources such as My Data Hubs, Amazon Web Services, local data storage, various different APIs into third-party sensors such as in-gym equipment or just worn straps like a movie sense. And it does all of that by hiding all the nasty authentication and grading behind its code. As a user, you get to see the pandas data frame that comes out of these queries. And all you need to know is a little bit of SQL and some amount of Python coding to start using this instantaneously. You can go download it from the GitHub link. It's open source, or you can also install it just by using your Python library manager. So where do I get started? As a PI, if you want to go ahead and add sensors into your project, what is a good way of starting? So the first way is to actually pick a wearable sensor. And as an example, I'm showing the four most common sensors that we have used in studies that we have supported: Fitbit, Garmin, Apple Watch, and Aura. We do intend to make a small table on our website that has a detailed view of all the different sensors that we have current support for. Most of these sensors support your standard things like daily activity, exercise, sleep, duration. All of those are supported by all these four different sensors. Intraday heart rate, where you get multiple heart rate values throughout a day, has varying support across multiple different sensors. For example, you can get 5 seconds intraday heart rate values from a Fitbit device as compared to a 5-minute intraday heart rate to Apple Watch. There are some other special supports for these different sensors. For example, IBI, which is interbeat interval, raw acceleration values, and minute-wide temperature data that each of these different sensors support. So based on your application, you can go ahead and pick the sensor that you need if you need one of these special supported metrics inside them. So I want to dive into a little bit more than just sensor aggregate data. So I want to give an example of what Fitbit supports beyond just the sensor aggregation. So Fitbit also supports intraday data access. This is, you can get access to this data by submitting a fairly simple research application. And once you do that, you get intraday heart rate values, breathing rate, HRV values throughout the day, SpO2, etc. So this is for researchers and studies which are not satisfied with the aggregate data you get for the whole day, but you want a higher level of access into that data and get data multiple times a day. Another interesting thing which I wanted to point out was Garmin, since we had a study that looked into stress. And so Garmin does give you stress values coming directly out of it. And it does so by stratifying them in different stress scores, like low stress, medium stress, high stress, etc. It also gives you an aggregate view of the number of seconds spent by each individual in that particular stress level. If you're looking for raw acceleration values, which I know a few teams are looking for gait analysis and tremors and things like that, then you can use the sensor kit from Apple. The downside of this is that you are tied to the Apple ecosystem, but the upside of this is that you get acceleration and rotation values directly from the Apple Watch, and you get them at a sampling rate of 100 hertz. Which is about 6,000 samples a minute. And that's a lot of data, but that also means that you can answer a lot more research questions on it. In our experience, it does impact the Apple Watch battery life, which is expected since it is collecting a large amount of data. And so you can expect your user's battery to go from charging once every 2 nights to charging once every night. So about 50% drop in the battery life. Aura is your companion for temperature, and a lot of studies which are looking into women's health right now, temperature is key for them. And Aura is also one of those devices that sits on your finger as compared to sitting on a wrist, which has several different advantages. One of them being that it's discrete. But it gives you permanent temperature data both day and night, and also gives you interbeat interval data. You do need a research level contract with Aura to be able to access all of this information, all of this data, and we support the technical portion of ingesting the data through our AWS counterpart of Sensor Fabric. Over here, I'm showing a small example of skin temperature for a participant for about 4 days of data, where you're getting one data point of temperature every single minute. One might think, what about things like Bluetooth, glucose monitors, weight scales, and things like that? You can connect them as well. Most of these smart scales, which connect with Bluetooth, low energy or Bluetooth, they connect into Google Fit and Apple HealthKit. And through our partners at My Data Helps and the Sensor Fabric ecosystem, you can ingest all of this information and make it available for your study. The screenshot at the bottom is showing you one of the studies we did, where we were able to collect blood glucose values from a Dexcom G6 CGM monitor, and we were able to reference that with Fitbit data that the users were also wearing for activity tracking. All right, so diving a little bit deeper into the integration magic, how does this all come together and how does this work together? This is a high-level flow diagram of how all the different components are connected to each other. There is CyVerse, which is our discovery environment data store. There is the third-party offering from My Data Helps, and there is a cloud provider like Amazon Web Services. I do want to focus a little bit on My Data Helps. So My Data Helps is a HIPAA-compliant platform that was created by a company called Asst Evolution. We use them because it makes it easy for us to funnel various different sensor devices and modalities into a single platform. For example, they connect with Garmin, Fitbit, Apple Watch, and a host of other different sensors, and we're able to go ahead and ingest all of that data into a singular platform, which allows us to not worry about the connections with these individual devices, but focus our attention more on the analysis of this particular data. They also connect to Apple HealthKit as well as Google Fit. And towards the end of the slides, I'll show a small demonstration of how you can go ahead and connect devices to their platform, and then how you can use Sensor Fabric and CyVerse to connect to My Data Hubs to be able to automatically ingest, open up a Jupyter notebook, and start running your analysis within minutes. CyVerse is used for everything from data ingestion to data storage for our Sensor Fabric. You can connect to My Data Hubs to CyVerse in two different ways. There's an SFTP connection, or a secure file transfer protocol connection, where My Data Helps automatically at the end of every single day, or a cadence that you determine, pushes all of the data in CSV or JSON format into the CyVerse data store. The other way of doing it is using one of our apps, the Sensor Fabric app that we have created, and connecting directly to My Data Hubs using their service account keys. You can also connect from CyVerse directly to AWS. And why is that important? There are some different various devices like the 1080 Sprint machines, which we use with the Athletic Center, or the Aura Ring, or a few other devices like the MobiSense or the Empatica, which directly connect to our AWS infrastructure. And I'm not going to get into too much details for this webinar. But we either use REST APIs to connect to them, or we have automatic ingestion into our S3 buckets into the AWS infrastructure. I'm going to skip this slide, but it will be there when you download the presentations. This gives you a complete overview of how we have set up our AWS infrastructure if someone's curious and wants to go ahead and try replicating that as well. So summarizing some of our options, you can connect from CyVerse directly to My Data Hubs. There's no AWS setup required. When CyVerse Health goes live, you will be able to access all the PHI data that is also stored inside My Data Hubs and bring that directly into your Jupyter notebooks for analysis. There has the least manual intervention. You don't require anybody to set up an account for AWS or connections for that reason. There are a few downsides to it. You cannot create custom SQL tables or views if you're running off of My Data Hubs. That's read only. And your data is active as long as the study is active. So you cannot archive it for several years. The other option is to have My Data Hubs directly transfer data into CyVerse using SFTP. And we have a mechanism through Sensor Fabric where you can access all the data by ingesting it into DuckDB, which is similar to SQLite, and creates a database file on the CyVerse data store that you can then run queries against using Sensor Fabric. The advantage of this is that you get to maintain and archive your data inside CyVerse itself. You can also use the CyVerse sharing feature to share your database file across multiple collaborators, and that allows you to have multiple people work on that data set. When CyVerse Health goes live, you'll be able to ingest PHI data into it, not directly though, since CyVerse Health does not support incoming connections. CyVerse also connects directly to AWS, and that can be useful if you have large data sets. For example, if you have a data set of multiple Apple Watches running SensorKit, you can use our AWS Athena connections to be able to go and then start querying data directly on AWS itself. For this talk, we are only going to focus on the first portion, but the slides have more details on the remaining two connections as well. All right, so let's dive into what the participant journey looks like. So let's say you have gone ahead and decided you want to use a Fitbit device, and you've been already integrated that into your study. How does the participant journey look like, and how does the participant connect to these devices? So they would go ahead and download the My Data Hubs app from the App Store, and they would go and scan the QR code for the study that you have designed inside the app. They would go and join the study by going to their e-consent as well as the introductory pages. And then comes the real fun part. Historically, when I've talked to teams last year, connecting any device was a challenge, right? If you had Fitbit or you have your Garmin, each team had made their own way of connecting to it. Using My Data Hubs, you can click a simple button that says connect to Fitbit. And once that button is clicked, the users can go ahead and enter their Fitbit username and password, and bam, they're connected to the Fitbit. The same works for Garmin. Apple Watch is slightly different, but a lot easier since you're already in the Apple ecosystem. And SensorKit just requires an additional consent that needs to be filled out by the participants to be able to connect them. The other devices like Aura as well as Empatica have a different way of connections. Those would connect directly with our AWS infrastructure, and we oftentimes work closely with the PIs to be able to do that. I want to give a quick demonstration of how you would go ahead and set this all up in My Data Hubs as a researcher now. So as a researcher, you would go ahead and create an account on the My Data Hubs website by CareEvolution. And once you have done that, created your own organization, created all of your basic enrollment and consent forms, you can then go ahead and navigate to the sensors and EHR data section on the left-hand side. You will get to see a bunch of different options for sensor connections. So Apple Health Kit, Fitbit data, Apple Sensor Kit data, Google Fit, Garmin data, etc. And you can pick the ones that you want to be enabled. So for example, in this screenshot, I'm showing you Apple Health Kit and one of our studies which has several different data modalities connected to it. All the screenshots I'm showing everyone right now are from our test study. So none of these screenshots are from any of our live studies which we have going on right now. Once you have done that, you can set up exports through My Data Hubs to SFTP. And I do want to mention that I will be sticking around towards the end of the webinar if anybody wants to see a hands-on demo of this. For the interest of time, we just included screenshots in this webinar so we can walk through some of these steps in a much easier fashion. So you can set up exports through My Data Hubs, and you can add SFTP details. CyVerse has great documentation on how you can find SFTP details for your username as well as your password, but you can also use your public-private key to be able to connect to SFTP if you don't necessarily want to use your password. Once you have done that, My Data Hubs will automatically export a zipped file into your CyVerse data store, where you can go ahead and access it through Sensor Fabric and DuckDB. It's also important to know what you want to choose to export. So definitely you can go ahead and export everything, or you can be more selective about the different study metrics that you can export. So for example, in this study, we are exporting the various Fitbit logs, but we are not really exporting any of the other details that we need. One thing to be mindful is that the standard CyVerse does not support PHI data. And if you do want to import PHI data, you would have to use CyVerse Health when that goes live and connect it to my data hubs to be able to import your data, archive your data, and also analyze the data onto CyVerse Health directly. The third way, which is what we are going to focus on for the remainder of this webinar, is to use a MDH service account. So the folks at MDH were My Data Hubs were very kind enough to create a streamlined pipeline where you just given the service account key, you can go ahead and create various different other keys that can then be used to access the data directly inside My Data Hubs. In order to do that, you go to your organization settings and you go under service accounts and you create a new service account. I have kind of blocked up a few of these things which show my key. But once you have done that, you remember to keep the private key secure. Sorry, remember to keep the private key secure. My Data Hub does not show that again, which is pretty common practice, but you will also need this private key inside your CyVerse Sensor Fabric app to be able to connect to the My Data Hub store. All right, so we're going to shift attention to CyVerse. Just a quick recap. We talked about the research aspects and its importance of connecting to various different wearable sensors. We also looked into different ways in which you can actually pick these wearable sensors. And then we took a look at one of our industry partners, My Data Helps, to be able to ingest all of the sensor information. So now once you're done connecting to sensors and ingesting this data into My Data Hubs, you can now connect to it using CyVerse. In order to do so, in your CyVerse account, go ahead and open up the CyVerse app, which is called the Sensor Fabric Jupyter. We are constantly updating this app. In fact, there was a new version just earlier this week, but we are very careful not to break any of your older versions. So you can still keep using your older versions for research and running your experiments in them, and then use your newer versions by selecting that particular version inside the CyVerse discovery environment for that particular app. Once you have launched the app, you'll see a screen, which I'm showing you right now. And you can also go to learning.cyverse.org to learn a bit more about how you can use the discovery environment to your advantage to be able to spin up these different apps very quickly. I do also want to point out that those familiar with how CyVerse works with tools and apps, we have a CyVerse tool called a Sensor Fabric Jupyter. I know it's the same name. It's a little confusing, but that tool is the one that takes care of all the hard work of connecting to these external sources, managing all the keys, has all the libraries installed already inside it to be able to start your analysis work. You can create another app on top of that tool with different parameters to meet your specific needs. So once you have once you have started the process of launching the CyVerse app, Sensor Fabric Jupyter, you will see a screen like this. It will have two main options. It'll have an option for you to directly connect to My Data Hubs, and it will have an option to directly connect to AWS. So let's go ahead and focus on the My Data Hubs part of it for now. In order to connect to AWS, for those who are familiar with IAM accounts in Athena, some of these fields might look pretty standard. You enter the database name for the AWS Athena database you want to connect to, and then an IAM account with the access keys and secret keys, which has the appropriate permissions to be able to connect to that. But today we are going to focus only on using My Data Hubs and directly connecting your data source using CyVerse. So in order to do that, you go ahead and enter a few different details into your My Data Hubs parameters, which are provided by the app. So you go ahead and enter your private key. For those who are paying close attention and taking screenshots, this key is pretty much fake. You can see that there's a bunch of random jargon strings in it, which have replaced the actual key. So it's not something that you guys can try immediately. You enter your private key. The one thing which I do want to focus on is because of how Docker and various containers are handled, multi-line environment variables are really difficult to pass. And so we request that when you pass your private key, you shrink it to a single line and put /n delimiters for new lines inside the environment variable. You go ahead and enter your project account name from My Data Hubs, and this is all in the service account screen that I showed you from My Data Hubs. And I'm more than happy to pull up screen grabs or even a screen share at the end of the webinar to walk over this if required. The last part is your project name. So an organization in My Data Hubs can have multiple different projects, and we need you to add your project name inside this as an environment variable when you're starting your new CyVerse app. So once you have connected with it, CyVerse will go ahead and spin up a Jupyter notebook that you can then go and connect to. And once you have connected to the Jupyter notebook, you can start using the Sensor Fabric library, which is already pre-installed for you to start accessing data. So data is accessed predominantly using SQL and Python. And we do have a version coming out which is using the JDBC connectors for database connection as well as R. So if you're on the R side of data analysis, just a few more weeks and we'll have that integration in Sensor Fabric as well. So I want to show a few code snippets on how you can actually go ahead and do that inside Sensor Fabric. And this is all running inside the Jupyter notebook, which has now been created when the app gets launched on CyVerse. And so everything inside Sensor Fabric is a needle. So think of needle as a point inside the fabric. And the reason we say sensor fabric is that because you can connect to multiple different sources using the same library at the same instances. So in this example is showing you just the 2 lines of code that you need inside your Jupyter notebook once the app has been started to connect to My Data Hubs. The library takes care of all the hard work of creating temporary keys, refreshing all the keys, and managing all of your data downloads that come through after you run the SQL queries. So if you're connecting to My Data Hubs, that's the only 2 lines of code you need in your Python to be able to do so. But what if you're connecting to AWS? It's exactly the same. All that changes is your method. So you shift from saying method equals to MDH for My Data Hubs to method equals to AWS for Amazon Web Services. Do you keep in mind that you need to have filled up your Amazon keys and you need to have an account set up inside AWS that is already ingesting data to be able to do this? A question which often comes to mind is, what if I want to connect to both of them, right? So when you started your CyVerse app, you have the option to fill both of them at the same time. So if you do go and fill them out, you can actually create different profiles to manage the Sensor Fabric connections. For example, in this piece of example, I'm showing a profile name, which is mdh-connect, that connects to My Data Hubs, and a profile name called AWS Connect that connects to AWS. And for those who are keen on how this works internally, we essentially just add this to your credentials file inside the .aws folder, where we create separate profiles that helps us manage these different credentials, including the expiration time as well as requesting new tokens when they expire. So once you have done this, how do you actually run the SQL queries on the data set, right? And so this is showing you an example of running a SQL query using the exec query function from the Needle class, which is part of Sensor Fabric. And that is going ahead and running a query that shows all the different stress states for a particular participant on a Garmin device. This is the same thing that you guys saw in the very beginning of the presentation, where I talked about the different Garmin stress states and things like that was generated using this. You might be thinking, how do I know the exact table? So for example, Garmin daily summary is a table. I will be covering that in part 2 of the webinar, where I'll be talking about the various different database tables, what they hold, and different queries that you can run against them. To be able to access all of that data. Just a quick tip about how I like to do it and how some of my team members do it is we usually just create a small Lambda function. And what that allows us to do is that it allows us to write shorthand notations to be able to access and get all of this query information. One thing I did forget to mention though is that the data comes to you as pandas data frames, so you don't have to do anything additional to be able to ingest the data. For larger data sets, the library also takes care of things like pagination and making sure that we are downloading all of the data for you. And in the next version of Sensor Fabric, we'll allow data to be fetched asynchronously, where you're not continuously waiting for the query to finish execution. You'll have a callback that gets called once the query has finished execution. And that is for larger data sets like the sensor kit, which has a large amount of data inside the database where you don't want to be necessarily pulling all of that at once. So what about offline caching? And this is a feature that we decided to add to Sensor Fabric for quite a few reasons. So those who are familiar with having used AWS Athena will already know that Athena has its own caching mechanism, right? Where if you have a query that is the exact same thing as something you ran before, it just pulls the results from S3. However, network transfer can be a pretty big deal. And when you're pulling in large amounts of data and continuously testing and debugging your code, or for example, if you're training machine learning models where you have created a data set using PyTorch and you're going ahead and continuously testing and changing your parameters, it is cumbersome to keep making those network requests. And for everything that is good about S3 and the way it stores it, it can be a bit slow to keep downloading data continuously from the network. So to avoid this frustration, we built in caching inside the Sensor Fabric library. And this is a quick example that shows the advantages of caching locally. And all of this data is cached in your container inside CyVerse. That does mean that if the CyVerse app dies, all of your cache also disappears. We see that as a good security so that everything is lived in there. But in the future iteration, we are also offering a argument where you can give a path to a shared file inside CyVerse data store where you can externally store all of your cache data. Again, I do want to remind that you cannot cache PHI data inside CyVerse. That will only be inside CyVerse Health when that goes live. So in this particular example, you can see that we are downloading data for skin temperature from Aura. And this is about 46,000 records, and it takes around 9.5 seconds to download all of the information over the network. However, if we go ahead and enable caching, and all you have to do to enable caching inside Sensor Fabric is pass a simple parameter which says offline cache equal to true, and that takes care of indexing all of your queries in the backend. So it creates an index of queries which have already run, has a time to live right now, which is by default 1 hour, but you can change it using parameters inside Sensor Fabric. And it goes and references queries which you have done in the past and pulls data locally from your local file system. When you do that, it goes from 11 seconds. I know the previous screenshot showed 9, but that's how unreliable networks can be sometimes. So the same request when made again to our AWS platform that's storing all the Aura data returned in 11 seconds. But with caching enabled, it's less than a second. So it's half a second to get all of that data, which is stored locally on your machine. And as long as the query remains the same, including the query parameters, if you have any, you don't have to worry about re-downloading the data from your cloud data source. Okay. All right, so we're kind of towards the end of the webinar. For part 2 of this webinar, we will be focusing a lot more into how you actually analyze this data once you have it in your CyVerse discovery environment, and running the CyVerse, running this the Sensor Fabric Jupyter app where you have Jupyter Notebook connected to these different sources. Just a quick teaser. On the top left, I'm showing a table which was created with a single SQL query that shows all the various activities a participant or all the participants have been doing on a data set that used Fitbit. And on the bottom right is Apache superset, which will be going over in part 2, which also will run inside CyVerse discovery environment. and use the same methods of connecting to these different data sources, which allow you to visualize all of your sensor data. So that is on October 20th, unless the dates change, but for now, that's what we have. And thank you guys. I will be sticking around for questions, and then also if anybody wants to dive in and look at some of these things in details. Thank you guys.
Thank
Oops,
you,
sorry.
Shravan.
Oh, I did forget one slide. I'm sorry.
Okay.
We just have a small slide which has additional resources. So if you want to go check out Care Evolution, that's the link to them. You can go ahead and check them out and the different offerings that they have. If you want to go ahead and look at the Docker container that runs all of this as a tool inside CyVerse, that container is available on Git, and the whole sensor fabric library is also open source and available on Git for you to be able to download. And a big thank you to CyVerse for letting me do this webinar, and also to Care Evolution, who have been amazing partners throughout this whole journey and allowed us to be able to integrate some of these sensor analytic tools into our pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Shravan? You covered everything really well in your slides, and I will definitely post the slides on our website so that people, one, can have these links, but also can or can follow your step-by-step instructions. So let's see if there's anything. I don't see any questions at the moment. I'm sure there's just a lot for people to digest, right? So hopefully many of you or all of you will join us again on October 20th for part 2 of the webinar. Thank you for attending. For those who want to watch Shravan's demo, please stay on the line. Otherwise, you're welcome to leave if you have to leave now. So thank you. And Shravan, you've got the screen. So do you want?
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I'm just waiting to see if anybody
Oh,
has
yeah.
any questions. I know that Carlos presented questions. Have you explored more options for large data sets besides Panda data frames? Carlos, not right now. Pandas is the only one we have used for sensor fabrics, because that was the quickest and the most used one for us to get started immediately.
Other questions? Okay. All right, looks like a bunch of people are sticking on the call, so.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. I'm going to quickly navigate to my browser. Hope everybody can see it. I'm going to go up, pull up the My Data Hub's dashboard, which we talked about. And the things that we kind of talked about were inside the My Data Hub's dashboard for a particular study. So for example, in this study, you can see we have multiple different projects. And so these are all of our testing projects in this particular organization. But if you go ahead and hit sensor and EHR data inside My Data Hubs, you can go and see the various different sensor modalities that you can connect to. So for example, Fitbit data, Apple Health Kit or Apple Health data, sensor kit data, Garmin data, and so on and so forth. And once you have gone ahead and enabled that, you can go into your export settings, which is here. And feel free to like stop me and ask questions if you guys have any, but I'll be moving to the CyVerse portion of this very soon as well. You can go ahead and set up your incremental exports, so either daily or weekly exports. And here's the SFTP options I was talking about. So on the CyVerse website, there is a detailed description about how you can connect via SFTP. We are using the same credentials here. So you have data.cyvers.org, and then you have the port number over here. If you go to your top right and click on workspace settings, that's where you will get the option to create an account, a service account. I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to go ahead and click on service accounts, and you will see a key there, but I'm going to go and delete the key immediately. Let's do one thing. Before I show the key, let's just quickly move on to discovery environment, so that way I can show you guys that stuff, and then I'm just going to remove all of these things so nobody can use them after that. So inside the CyVerse discovery environment, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, if you go into your apps, If you go and just search for, let's just go search for public apps, and you'll see two different apps here. The Sensor Fabric Superset app is what I'm covering next week in part 2 as part of that. And then Sensor Fabric Jupyter is what we talked about today. Because the new version of the app has not yet been released on the public part of CyVerse, I'm going to go into apps under development and click on it through that. So, oops, I gotta go and kill something. And so if I go into my apps under development and look at Sensor Fabric Jupyter, I can go ahead and start that. So I'm just gonna call this test Sensor Fabric analysis. And this is the screen I was showing you guys. So you have two options. You can add the actual My Data Hubs connections, or you can also add your AWS connections if you have any. So I'm going to show an example of how you can add your My Data Hubs one, and we'll do that through our test account that we have here, which doesn't really have any real study data. So I've already gone ahead and created a service account. And you can go ahead and create a new service account by just saying that service account. And if you go ahead and add that as a new service account, you'll be asked to register new keys. And once you go ahead and say add a new key, you can just click on the blue button to add a new key, and it'll give you a public and a private key. So this is what I was talking to you about. Some of the containers are not really good at ingesting multi-line or multi-line environment variables. So what we do is I've written like a small script locally that takes this private key and basically just condenses it into a single line with slash ends at the end of it. So why don't we go to an analysis which has already been running and just restart it, so we don't have to go ahead and do that, the key shrinking thing. So I'm going to go into my analysis in CyVerse, and I'm going to go ahead and just start analysis, which I had started before. So it's this one. And over here, this is the actual key, which will be void after this webinar, but that does show you the key as well as the account name and the project ID there. So once you have entered that, and you have to put /n when you're entering these different keys, you can hit next. I just usually leave everything default as is. You can hit next again, and then you can go ahead and launch your analysis. So everything is already set for you. And once you launch your analysis, it'll take a few minutes, and bam, your Jupyter notebook should be ready with connections into My Data Hub. So we'll just wait for a bit there. All right, perfect. So once that's ready, I already have a small notebook which I have written. So I'm going to go into my home, go into my username, and I have and then I can make these notebooks available publicly as well in our GitHub if somebody wants to go and take a look at them. So if I go into Sensor Fabric 2.0, and so for those who have stuck around, I didn't show this in the actual presentation, but we need to do this for our keys again. The reason being that way Python's OS package adds additional escape characters, but we will be adding this to our library soon in the next release so that you don't have to do this every single time. But once, let's just assume that you went ahead and did that, you can go ahead and connect to the My Data Hubs part of it. It takes slightly bit longer. What it's doing in the backend is that it's using the service account keys to then go and create temporary tokens. Then it's using those temporary tokens to do a test connection and run a test query on the My Data Hub source just to make sure everything is correctly working. And we take care of automatically refreshing your tokens when they're about to expire, and also help with caching of the information. This is running a very simple query, but it's run a much simpler query before that. Let's just say needle.exec query, and I'm just going to ask it to show me all the tables that I have in my database that I'm connecting to. So this is all the tables that I'm seeing here. And this is your standard SQL. So you can run any standard SQL queries here, and this will show you all of those different results. You can go ahead and do your analysis in the exact same manner. I do want to, while we don't have AWS credentials inside this one, inside this particular analysis which I started, I do want to show an example of how that might happen. So I'm just showing you an example of how you might use Sensor Fabric and AWS to connect to Aura Ring data, which is automatically being ingested into our AWS. And so this is essentially just a quick piece of code that's going in and looking at some skin temperature data, and it's using that particular skin temperature data to then just go ahead and give a summary statistics describing that data frame that we are returning from it. All right, guys. That is all I have to show right now. Before anybody tries to use the keys, I'm going to go delete all of them.
Are there any questions for Shravan? You don't have to type it into the chat. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask. Clearly, you've been working really hard to get everything ready for people. Is everything ready to go then, Shravan? Like people could log in later this afternoon and start to use your
Yes,
app?
it would be a little bit more involved, though. They would have to go ahead and have a project which has sensors. So I think Megan is asking, can you view data in real time or is there a latency? So Megan, you can't view the data in real time. There's always a delay of about 12 hours, depending on various different devices and when they're ingested into it. Most of the devices don't actually upload data in real time for us to view. So for example, if you're using CGM monitors, the delay can be up to around 24 hours. If you're using sensor kit, the delay is about 48 hours. If we are using Aura, they essentially dump data every single day. So that would be around 12 hours. Fitbit and Garmin also have a delay of 12 hours the way we are set up right now.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other
And
questions?
so
Oh,
Tina, just switching back to your thing. And I'll address Eliang's question shortly, but switching back to your thing, Tina, the new version of the app which I showed now will be live by next week, where you'll get to see all the parameters. The version of the app that is live right now only allows you to connect to AWS, but not to My Data Hubs directly. And if you do want to get started with the study, you would have to create your own My Data Hubs account, create the study portion, which we help PIs at the U of A do, and then use the keys to then use the CyVerse app to connect.
thank you. Yeah,
And
Ilyang's quick
then
question.
Ilyang is, yes, Ilyang, you are right. Actually, CyVerse Health does not allow you to use SFTP, so you will not be able to use SFTP on CyVerse Health. So for CyVerse Health, you can only use the service account mechanism, the first one, where CyVerse Health is talking to the My Data Hub server or the AWS server and pulling all the data in locally and storing it inside the data, the discovery environment. And Neerav just clarified that as well.
Okay. More questions? You've got Shravan's undivided attention, so.
Yes, before I get kicked out of this room at 11 o'clock.
No. All right. If there are no more questions, maybe by the time next month's part 2 rolls around, there'll be some more. So we maybe can include a little bit of quick review or something for part 2 in case there are. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to end the webinar for today, and we'll see you online next month.